Welcome to our third conversation in our Building Black, Brown, and Immigrant Power series, where we hear from Black, Brown, and immigrant leaders collectively organizing and building power across communities. Black, Brown, immigrant, and Indigenous communities continue to unite in the fight for the rights and freedoms, despite the constant attempts of white supremacist structures to divide and oppress us. As communities of color, we carry with us a great deal of strength and resilience that have helped us overcome the toughest of times in this country and continue to get us today through this pandemic. In the past 6 months or so, Black, Brown, immigrant, and Indigenous communities have worked hard to make sure we showed up at the polls through phone banking, texting, campaigning, and Black voter turnout has been historic this year, turning states like Georgia from red to blue. Today, we're going to hear from three leaders about some of the great wins we've been able to have during the past presidential election and some models for Black, Brown organizing. We're also going to hear about what some of the challenges are that exist when we try to do cross-racial organizing. And lastly, we're going to hear where our leaders are turning their attention as we enter this new administration. Before we dive in, I just want to lift up a couple calls to action. So the first is that we ask that you join our Freedom Together campaign, which is our immigration campaign for fight for citizenship, relief, and recovery. So take a moment to sign up for that and join our community. We're also asking that you donate to our new Georgia Project Action Fund, which exists to increase civic participation of underrepresented and undeserved communities of color, and they're doing incredible work right now for the Georgia runoff elections. So take a moment to also support that as well. Great, so with that, I want to dive in and I want to first welcome to this space Nana Gyamfi, the Executive Director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Welcome, Nana. And next, I'd like to invite Fasika Alam, the Program Director at the United African Organization. Welcome, Fasika. And then lastly but not least, I'd like to welcome Lawrence Benito, Executive Director of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Welcome, Lawrence. So glad that you all could join us today for what we hope will be a fruitful conversation about building Black, Brown, and immigrant power in America. And right now, we're living in challenging times here in the US and really across the globe with this pandemic that's seeing another wave and disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities, and with an administration that has explicitly attacked our communities. And there is no better time than now for Black and Brown and immigrant leaders to come together. And we've seen that in the past elections, right? We know that Black, Brown voters had the highest turnout for eligible voters. And in particular, Black voter turnout was the highest it's ever been. And so I'd love to start off just to hear from you all about what are some of the wins that you've had in this past election season? We know you've been really busy, hard at work, locally, and we love to hear some of those success stories. So Nana, I want to invite you first into the conversation. Please share with us some of the great work that Baji has been doing during the election season.
Thank you so much for that, Bethel. Thank you for the frame, and thank you for inviting us to talk about this really important conversation at this point as we see the administration, a new administration coming in, and the present administration slowly but surely letting go. It's really important for us to think about how we got here. And so with Baji, a lot of the work that we did with our civic engagement coordinator, Neka Chapu, and our civic engagement associates who were in New York, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, and California, is to really build Black migrant civic engagement muscle. We didn't just focus on eligible voters, though, of course, we clearly focused on them as well. But we also focused on folks who are not able to vote because they're not citizens, or because they are formerly incarcerated or have any other bar to being an eligible voter. We wanted to make sure that our people understood that we all can be part of the civic engagement project. We all can be part of this voter engagement project, whether we actually can get to the ballot box or not. And so we focus particularly on Black migrant communities. who often maybe their minds are more back home than they are here in this country, to give a remembrance to people about why it's important for them, for us to support voting, why it's important for us to get our folks out to vote, both for our people living in this country and our people abroad. We worked really hard on providing some culturally competent materials. So that means materials not just in Black languages, that materials that spoke to our communities and why they would want to make sure on behalf of our families, on behalf of our countries, in terms of home countries, they would want to engage this process, whether they were eligible to vote or not. We worked on so many webinars. We had Insta Lives, Facebook Lives. We were able to, in the last 5 days up to the election and including the election, we connected with 475,000 people, right? Targeting specifically areas where Black folks are, whether they be migrant or citizen, to get them to get out to vote. And that was the work of our civic engagement associates, who we're so proud of, our civic engagement coordinator, who did an excellent job, and those Baji volunteers who came to the table in an effort that we did in collaboration with the leadership conference entitled Black Justice is Our Justice. We were able to be part of the work in Michigan to get the vote out there, which we believe was what helped result in Michigan being blue. Just on election day alone, we contacted almost 100,000 folks there in Michigan. We also were in Nevada as well, and we're also a part of that wonderful effort. But even in places that continue to stay red, we were able to help get more of our folks out, and it showed. And so when we look at a place like Florida, we can see this great increase in Black engagement, period, but Black migrant engagement in particular. And we see the first woman of color mayor being elected in Broward County. And again, that was connected, with that vote. Of course, we're continuing to do get out the vote work in Georgia. Baji is a leader in the Get Out the Vote effort with Black migrants from the Black diaspora there. Inse Ufot, who is the executive director of the New Georgia Project, is also a Baji board member. And so we're connected directly in that work, and particularly with Black migrants in a way that many others on the ground are not.
Thanks so much, Nana. I just wanted to lift up the great work that you talked about doing, especially working with Black migrants who may not be eligible to vote, but still engaging them in the political process and just the importance of that. I think it's something that's often overlooked. So it's incredible that you are doing that. And it just made me think of, I have undocumented family members who actually did more than some of my family members who are eligible to vote to make sure that other people got registered. I mean, from, registering older women in our families and friend circle, actually driving them to the polls. And so I think we often forget the importance of their role in this as well. And also the connection that they have to a better society and a better democratic future for themselves as well, right? As we think about the immigration space and how that it impacts them. So thanks for lifting that up. Fasika, I'd love to go over to you. And, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your organization's work. I know you guys do a lot of service-oriented work. How has that impacted the work that you've done during the elections? And please go ahead and share.
Thank you, Bethel. So for us, as you said, yes, we are both a service providing organization and an advocacy organization. So during the pandemic, a lot of our work has focused on meeting the immediate needs of our constituents. However, that has also been, a vehicle for the organizing and civic engagement work that we are doing. So as a coalition-based organization, the strength of UAO really lies in the networks that lie within the communities and the community leaders. And so that network kind of facilitates not only sharing information, but getting an assessment of community needs, and really is instrumental in the organizing work that we do. So as part of that, for example, during the pandemic, we really started to more intentionally engage our leaders. For example, we had these monthly roundtables with our leaders that engage them in, some of the policy development work to have dialogue about, making sure we have shared visions among the various community organizations that are represented under UAO. And our volunteers and our leaders, our community navigators were really instrumental in that, supporting the work of ICER during the election phone banking, to make sure that the immigrant voice is heard. And as you both mentioned, Nana and Bethel, really the leaders in this work have been those that have not been eligible to vote. So our community navigators, our leaders within the community, many of whom are undocumented, and they've really been at the forefront of supporting our civic engagement work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to emphasize, I think, there's such an incredible need during this pandemic for direct services, right? And just like helping people where they're at. And so it's so important to have organizations like you in this space who can both, provide those direct services, but then create a platform to engage in politics in the process as well. So thank you. Lawrence, I'd love to hear from you about ICIR's sort of wins and engagements during the election season.
Thanks, Bethel. It's an honor to share the stage with all of you. I'm a big fan of Community Change, Baji, and United African Organization, both of you as individuals and the organizations that you represent. We've had a few wins this past year. I think it goes actually further back in terms of the wins across Black and Brown communities, starting with the census, where we had Black, Brown, immigrant organizations working together to advocate at the state level for the largest investment by any state per capita, $29 million towards the census. With that money, ICR received over $7 million to field the largest field operation in the state to ensure that immigrant voices were heard and counted inside the census. And we also work with organizations in the Black and Black immigrant communities, United African Organization, and the Worker Center for Racial Justice on that. So we're very proud of that. And the reason why I mention that is because of the infrastructure the census built in terms of recruiting volunteers and the outreach that we had to do during the pandemic. And that creativity in terms of outreach helped with the infrastructure, the field operation, the digital and communications work that we had to do in terms of getting out the vote during the pandemic as well. Inside of that, we were able to share resources across communities. We were also able to share lessons learned and approaches to making sure that our outreach, particularly during this difficult time, was the best that it could be. It's no surprise to folks that the disproportionate impact of COVID on Black, Brown, and immigrant communities in particular. And so when COVID hit, we had to quickly pivot our advocacy efforts to make sure that we were meeting the needs of communities that we represent. And with the disproportionate impact on Black and immigrant communities, we advocated for a platform that ensured that all people, regardless of immigration status, got the testing and the follow-up, resources that they needed in this moment. We also advocated for direct cash assistance for all communities. We were able to win over $20 million in direct cash assistance for immigrant communities in particular, particularly for those who were not eligible for the economic stimulus package that had passed. Lastly, a lot has been talked about the electoral work. As ICR and our C4 ICR Action, we made over 2 million calls this election cycle, 1.5 million here in Illinois alone, and over 500,000 to Wisconsin, and then also other calls to Michigan as well. So inside of this national victory, we can definitely say that immigrant communities had a role in the outcome of the election in key battleground states. Inside of the election, there were issues like the fair tax campaign that we worked with, again, alongside other communities. We worked on this past year a state's attorney's race and endorsements around that, pushing for more equity in terms of representation, in terms of fair treatment, in terms of pushing back on the criminalization of Black and immigrant communities as well. So those are some of the things that we worked on this past year, and look forward to sharing more as we continue the program.
Wow, Lawrence, that's incredible. I mean, you just listed out a lot of really great collective organizing that you were able to do locally, and a lot of great wins for the people that you're serving. So thank you so much for sharing that. And this actually, your examples actually tie into sort of my next question about what does collective organizing look like across racial lines? You know, what is the model in organizing when we think about working with Latinx communities, with African American communities, with Black immigrant communities? What does it look like when we're actually throwing down together? I mean, I think you lifted up a lot of good examples. I'd love to hear some more examples, perhaps from you, Fasika or Nana, about, you know, what some of those wins look like. And then thinking about what are the conditions that actually were needed, that necessary to, you know, sort of come across racial lines and bridge those barriers to work together. Fasika, how about you go first this time?
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, for us, it's been, you know, part of it has been building our own capacity, seeing that now, you know, you know, particularly as Lauren said, starting with the census, we're seeing the need to, and the pandemic more specifically, we're seeing the need for us to advocate for, you know, to be part of the conversations and to be a part of the action and to advocate for the resources that our communities need. And so part of it has been building relationships with funders, with partners like ICER and BAJI, one, to raise the funds, you know, to do this work, but also to build our, you know, organizational capacity beyond funding. The other part has been about building relationships with our community itself, right, and growing leaders. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, being intentional about a consistent engagement with leaders has been one area that we've really been working on. But we've also, you know, we're also part of several coalitions that allow us to work in settings with other similarly led organizations or people, you know, organizations that have similar missions to us, including, you know, the Illinois Language Access Coalition that has been working around making sure that, you know, particularly during COVID, that our communities are accessing resources and information in languages that they're most comfortable with, right? Whether it is applying for unemployment benefit and being able to access the information in a language you understand. But it's also been an opportunity to connect with organizations that we may have not previously worked with. And now we're, you know, working to continue to build on those connections and actually build meaningful relationships. You know, we were able to connect with, you know, one organization is the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, and that was out of our census work. So, you know, we look forward to building those relationships. But even though, and we also realize that even though our our focus may primarily be the African immigrant and refugee population, it was also important for us to bridge um, the build bridges with communities where our most of our constituents live or have businesses. So working with local elected officials around for example, our office space, right, to do census outreach and to provide services. Working with leaders in communities that our businesses are located to do similar things has been really helpful for creating those relationships we know will be useful moving forward, and increasing our ability to affect change. And that's a great way, particularly at this time, by meeting people's most immediate needs, I think is a very powerful way to then continue to engage them and have them, support the work that we do.
Thanks so much, Fasika. What I'm hearing a lot from what you just shared is that it's all about building those meaningful relationships and really meeting people where they are. And I think that's so important. Now, and I'd love to hear from you about, what are some of the models for Black Brown organizing that you have experienced that you could share some lessons learned from?
So I'm going to start, and thank you again for this opportunity to talk about what the work looks like in action. I want to start with the work that we're doing in Georgia. And so we are leading the work of the Building Black, Brown, and Immigrant Power work that we're doing together with Firm in Georgia under the stewardship of the fantastic Lavette Carbo Thompson, who is our Baji's Georgia lead organizer. And in doing that work, we've been able to pull a coalition of folks together where we've had a series of convenings and training sessions that have been focused mainly on rapid response, but have allowed us to expand what we mean by rapid response to not just include what happens with respect to, ICE raids or what happens with respect to mutual aid, but also to be expanded to include what we're doing when we are talking about COVID relief for people coming out of detention, and what we're doing to support people who decide they want to throw down in the streets as protesters, how we're protecting them. And so when it comes to detention for folks who were getting released from detention as a result of efforts that we were a part of to push for ICE to let people go as direct response to COVID, we assisted with direct cash assistance. We assisted with purchasing phones and other ways to allow people to contact their loved ones once they got out, those that had people outside. We even helped folks to get clothes and to get amenities that they could take with them to their loved ones, helped to try to see what we could do to help people secure some kind of quarantining space. And this was done in coalition with other organizations in this effort to build Black and Brown and Immigrant Power. We also did a lot of base building, as Fasika has described, within the Black immigrant world. There locally in Georgia, but also connecting up a national level. So we're part of the Black Immigrant Working Group, where we are connected with other Black immigrant rights leaders, as well as in the racial justice area, focusing on the work that we're doing with multi-generational African Americans as part of Movement for Black Lives, including working on the immigration aspect of the BREATHE Act, as well as working on the ground in Georgia in particular in defense of Black lives. And so our work has been internally based building, connecting up with other Black migrant groups, and working with Black immigrant groups and racial justice groups that are on the ground and also in the policy advocacy world. We also are part of the National Immigration Field Table, along with Firm, Faith in Action, United We Dream, CPD, and others. We did a lot of work on the census, and we continue to do that work now as we look at how we're becoming a part of this national campaign structure that's being developed, as well as being a national partner for the National Immigration Integration Conference, which is the largest immigration rights conference in the country. It's the first time that a Black-led, Black immigrant rights organization is a partner, and we're thrilled about it. We are very involved and have made sure that Black folks are involved in the actual presentations throughout the public-facing NIC. And then we have an invite-only Black virtual NIC that we're inviting Black immigration leaders as well as racial justice leaders to come together to strategize. And so from the local to the national, from the focus particularly on Black immigrants to the bigger coalition work, both on immigration rights and racial justice, we are, working very hard to build Black and Brown and immigrant power and to provide models for how that can be done.
Thanks so much, Nana. And yes, just want to lift up again. I think it's just incredible that you are a leader with the NIC, and we hope that folks are able to join you as you give a voice to Black immigrants in a leading way, right? Which is so critical in the immigrant rights space. So that's incredible. And I just want to also lift up, you've done so much political education and trainings and workshops on the various things that you mentioned, from racial justice to know your rights, rapid response. And it's really a great way to bring people together, because when you think about Black and Brown immigrants, right, and as we're all experiencing this moment together and the oppressions that we all face, these are opportunities and moments for us to come together, right? It's a learning experience for all of us. It's an experience to all share our experiences, but also get a side of what other people are experiencing on the other side. And I want to come back to the racial justice work, because I know that has been a big topic, obviously, this summer and continuing now in a little bit. But I want to move over to you, Lawrence. I know you recently had a fundraiser, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how that contributes to your Black-Brown organizing work.
Thanks, Bethel. Yeah, we recently had a fundraiser, and given what has happened this past year, longer than that, but the growing awareness, we felt that as a coalition, we needed to do our part in trying to raise awareness of what Black and Black immigrants face in this country, have faced for centuries. And so when the uprisings and what happened with George Floyd happened, we took a step back before we made a statement to make sure that our members and our board of directors understood the moment and what we would be committing to longer term. And inside of that, we had a conversation at the board level that it was not enough just to provide a seat at the table, because we just didn't want to tokenize people. But what were we going to do as an organization to put our money where our mouth was, right? Talk is cheap. Anyone can put out a statement in the moment, and we wanted to make sure whatever we put out, we were going to stand behind. And so when we looked around at how we were going to respond in this moment, it was not enough just to figure out, well, how do we make room for United African Organization at the table? And I met with Fasika and Nancy, the executive director, and we had been in conversation over this past year. So this is not something that we were just responding to in the moment. We were trying to figure out how can they be more fully involved in our work, and it was a question of resources. And so we developed a plan. They wanted to create a position, and I had a conversation with them and their board chair, and I said, okay, so how can I be helpful? Can I connect you to national organizations like Baji, Community Change, and others? Can I be helpful by helping to raise money? And so I made a commitment that I would. We figured out what they needed, and I said, okay, I'll try to raise a third of what you need, and we'll dedicate some portion of our next fundraiser. So we set a goal as an organization. We were going to try to raise $100,000 for a fundraiser, and if we raised $100,000, we would give $25,000 of that to United African Organization towards this project. And so we had our fundraiser. We raised over $100,000, and I look forward to sitting down with UAO and handing over the check for $25,000. And I mean, as simple as that is, I feel like we all have to take a step back and say, what is our responsibility in this moment, and what can we each do? And for us, that was part of our contribution to this moment, and to lift up the work that UAO has done, and the potential of what they could do in helping to be bridges between immigrant communities and African American communities here in Chicago and in the state of Illinois.
Thanks so much, Lawrence, and congratulations for meeting your goal, but also congratulations to you, Fasika, and your organization. Yeah, I think I love the example that you shared. Historically, Black organizations have been underfunded, or continue to be underfunded, and that goes for Black immigrant-led organizations as well. So, I think your example, your model of really approaching the organizations and really thinking about what is your responsibility, or what is our collective responsibility as people, as organizers, as leaders who are working in this movement. How can we bring our brothers and sisters in so we can be on the same level playing field, right? And I think the way you described it, I think is such a good example for the rest of the community to sort of learn from, as a way of just asking, what do you need? What do you need in order for you to be able to thrive, right, and meet your goals? So thanks for lifting that up. I want to go now also to something that you lifted up as well, just touching on sort of the racial dynamics and what's been going on in our country, the past couple of months. So, and transition a little bit into what some of the challenges are that might exist, as we try to work across racial lines, including looking at the current context of sort of the racial injustices that have been taking place, and knowing that Black immigrants are disproportionately impacted when we think about sort of the immigration attacks that are happening in this country. I'd love to open up the floor to you, Fasika, just to hear a little bit about sort of what are those dynamics when we think about what are the challenges of possibly collectively working together and building power together.
Thanks, Bethel. I think the first thing that comes to mind, particularly with this really hostile administration, has been the fear that it has created among our communities to be able to engage and take action, right? People are scared to access resources that they need, so let alone feel like they have a voice that they can, lift up in this time. So that has definitely been a challenge. We're still also, as a community, I guess, trying to figure out what solidarity really means. For example, if we don't include partners from the beginning of the conversation and include them in the developing the shared vision, then is that solidarity? So really trying to think about at what, when do we start the conversation, or how do we engage each other to build solidarity, and really identifying areas that encompass all of us, right? A lot of times we tend to view immigration related policy work separate from other social justice issues, not being able to see the opportunity to bridge the conversation between abolishing ICE and abolishing prison, which is a conversation that has been taking place much longer than that of abolishing ICE. So seeing those opportunities to bridge the gaps, I think, is one of those challenges. And then, the idea that, as Nana had mentioned this previously, making sure that we are including undocumented individuals in this conversation, right? Even though, particularly around election, there's this, idea that, your vote is your voice, right? But we have to think about what are other ways that we can include undocumented folks, because if that's the only lens in which we look at it, then we're essentially saying the voice of undocumented folks doesn't matter. So being intentional about, making sure that we incorporate their voice. For us, it's been, how do we, more effectively pivot? We reach a lot of people, particularly during COVID. We've been able to expand our reach within our community, but then how are we, are we effectively then pivoting that engagement into our advocacy work? Are we engaging people effectively in that work? Another challenge for us particularly is bridging the gap between generations, right? We know that our younger community members, second generation, are much more active around organizing and around civic engagement. So, but how do we bridge the gap between our older generation and those folks that have had, our immigrated and then had children? So those views tend to be different. So how do we engage and bridge the gap between the two? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fasika. I think, you lifted up some very important points. I think the engagement part, I think, stood out to me because you mentioned that quite a bit, both engaging the different generations, but also how we engage and how we include all people at the table in a meaningful way, right? From the start of a conversation, from the conception of an idea, rather than just pulling people in, perhaps referring to, I think, what you mentioned earlier, Lawrence, not tokenizing people, right? But actually engaging with them in a meaningful way. So thank you for lifting some of those things up. Nana, I'd like to come to you next and hear a little bit about what some of the challenges are that you have faced, and also just, sort of reflecting on some of the work that you've done in Georgia. Perhaps what are some of the hurdles that you faced when you did some of that coalition work?
So, I mean, the challenges that I would raise are not challenges that are necessarily specific to Baji. These are things that Black immigrants have been talking about for a long time, and dealing both with immigrant rights and the racial justice movements. But there's, as we look forward, we see people scrambling, right, trying to see how we're able to affect immigration policy, how we're able to affect what the administration, this new administration, may or may not do. And then even folks looking locally, statewide, at things that are happening. And in light of what happened this summer, where there was this renewed sort of the surge, it always like ebbs and flows, this surge of interest and action on behalf of Black folks with respect to police murders of Black people. There, we have a lot of conversation that people are having again that are not Black about confronting anti-Blackness and centering Black folks. But if we did a poll of Black organizations, I think you would find that most Black immigrant organizations would say that it's not turning into action in terms of us really being centered. And Fasika spoke to some of that in terms of what part of the conversation we get brought in at, right? Is it just at the part where they're sending out the calendar invite, or is it at the part where we're actually talking strategically about what's happening? And, in the interest of time, I don't want to go through all the pieces, but one thing that I think is really important for us to have in our mind in terms of framing is an understanding, and Fasika touched on this, that the most radical ideas that we have, whether it be with respect to immigrant rights or racial justice, and it's our position that immigrant rights is a racial justice issue. So they're not actually separated. But for those of people who think of it separately, the most radical ideas have come from Black people, period. They've come from multi-generational African Americans. They've come from Black migrants. And so this idea that people have to include us in the conversation or figure out how to bring us in is a little backwards. We've been in, we are in, we're the in. So no one's bringing us into anything. What has effectively been happening is people have been operating around us or outside of us, and then kind of looking and then we storm the party because or crash the wedding because we're like, yo, we've been doing this work, and now how suddenly is work happening without us? And so we see that in the work of abolition. We've been talking about abolition, both of local cops in cages and of detention centers, ICE, etc. And yet, if you look at the kind of mainstream detention focused organizations, there are no Black immigrants as leads, right? And we have to wait, have to sort of crash the party as opposed to being integrated and in the discussion from the beginning. And so that would be sort of the call to action that I would make around this issue, is for people to adjust their frame and to really understand that, take Black people's hands if you want to live. If you want to be free, then take the hands of those folks, Black people, who are cutting down the cane and making the path, as opposed to what's happening now, in which that's not occurring.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Wow, I think you just kind of said it all, right? Our fates are inextricably linked, and I think folks need to remember that in the movement, but also outside the broader movement. And when you talk about the fact that the most radical ideas have come from Black people, I mean, I think that's a fact, but it isn't a fact that everyone believes. And so I think there's this question around how do we get people to see that, right? And I think there's a huge political education component that needs to take place for people to really understand the true history and the true path that has led us to where we are today. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Lawrence, I want to come to you real quick before we close about any challenges that you have seen and any call to actions now that Nana has also made this call to action about really having a different framing that you'd like to lift up.
Well, I plus whatever everything that Fasika and Nana just said, but I think the one thing that I will raise is our organizations get enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. So a lot of awareness has been said about the need for this work to happen, but the money has yet to follow. I guess one thing I want to flag for funders out there that talk about this work, there's not a lot of money that's put towards the work itself. And so organizationally, we've had to try to figure out inside of the funding silos that we get, how do we push this issue in the healthcare work that we do? How do we push for health equity that's broader than just immigrants inside of the awareness that we're trying to push around criminalization, detention, pushback on police accountability? We're trying to think broader, right, and educate ourselves about what can we do to message this. But, with very few exceptions, maybe the Margaret Casey Foundation that funds multi-year general operating support that provides us with the opportunities to take risks and do the work that we need to do or want to do. There are very few examples of that. And so, my request would be for foundations to, put their money where their mouth is and invest deeply in this work that desperately needs to happen. Because it's beyond solidarity, right? We are linked. Their issue is my issue. And so how do we move forward in this work together?
Thanks so much, Lawrence. Yes, again, so the call to action is more money for Black organizations, right, to be able to do this work and to do it meaningfully. I know we have to close now. I just want to express deep gratitude to the hard work that you all are doing, the hard work that your organizations are doing and your leaders and your base are doing and that have been doing this year. It's been an intense 2020. As we lead into one of the holidays of the year, the first sort of transition into hopefully slowing down, recognizing that it's not a holiday for everyone. We do invite folks to start thinking about, some of these framings as we reflect on sort of the Building Black, Brown, and Immigrant Power organizing work that has taken place over the past year. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. We don't want to end on challenges, but we want to start thinking about how can we then start taking some steps to improve this work, right, for us as a movement. And so with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us. And I just want to lift up our calls to action again. In addition to the calls to action that our great panelists have lifted up, please join our Freedom Together campaign in our fight for citizenship, relief, and recovery, and also donate to the New Georgia Project Action Fund so that we can do some great groundwork for the Georgia runoff elections. Thank you all and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.